And then in 1990, he left the practice to work for a home builder land development client. And in 1999, the Bancorp Group became Dave's full-time employment. Bancorp is a residential land development company, which Dave owns and he is a president of. During his career, Dave has developed approximately 3,000 residential lots. For most of the communities, Bancorp partners with others. 3 of the communities that Bancorp has been involved in developing have been recognized for their low-impact development techniques. Dave will talk about these communities today. Dave also runs the Minnesota office of Newland Communities, which develops master planned residential communities across the United States. Dave has served on a suburban school board, chaired the same suburbs planning commission, and served on a citizen advisory board of the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. He is currently a member of the board of directors of the Twin Cities Community Bank. And in his spare time, he likes to bike, sail, and lead an effort by the Rotary District to create a new model for sustainable economic development in Nicaragua. As part of that effort, has made 11 trips there. So we'd like to welcome Dave.
We're live. Well, Jennifer, I think it's very kind of you not to blame the turnout on the speaker, and rather blame it on the weather. I was down here. I hear the term. I hear a couple of people from Norwalk. I was down here in 1998, working on behalf of Round Development, and we acquired 2 sites, one in Norwalk and one in Pleasant Hills. I wasn't there to follow through the process, but I was down here about 20 years ago and spent some time. I think the reason I got invited to speak is because of my combination of working both in the private sector and on the public side. And one of the things we really do as a company is we focus on collaboration and talking to people from on the other side. And so I think hopefully as we come through this conversation, we'll talk about our experiences in the Twin Cities and how we dealt with stormwater, and hopefully we'll come up with some lessons that will be beneficial to you. As Jennifer said, I'm going to focus on 3 communities, all of which have received awards for the way we've dealt with stormwater. You'll see in the presentation a lot of reference to low impact development or conservation development. All those really is critical to how we treat the stormwater. And so it really, the number one focus in any of these types of approaches is stormwater. So I may use different terms, but we're really going to be talking about stormwater. And why does it matter? I suspect all of you realize this, but as you can see, the Mississippi River Basin drainage area covers most of Minnesota and most of Iowa. The upper Mississippi has been declared an impaired water. We need to deal with stormwater. If we don't figure it out, we're going to be impacting our lives and the lives of future generations. The communities I'm going to be talking about all are in the western suburbs in Hennepin County, which is west of Minneapolis. It just so happens they're all in that area of the Twin Cities, but what I'm going to talk about really applies throughout our metro area. First one is Wild Meadows. We broke ground on that site in 2000. It was the first conservation development done in the Twin Cities. It was located in the municipality of Medina. Medina is kind of a rural, suburban area with a lot of horse farms, a lot of very, very wealthy people. They like having their large lots. They want to be left alone. The school district is Wayzata, which is a high-demand school district, particularly at that time. The overall site was 345 acres. We developed it in 150 single-family home sites. The lots varied from a half acre to 1.7. Almost 200 acres of open space.
Might be a battery.
Shows, no. Well, it might be too far away. 200 acres of open space, almost 60% of the site, and all but 4 of the lots abutted open space. City sewer and water was a very successful project. One of the first things we do is we hire an ecological firm. All 3 projects we used Applied Ecological Services out of Madison. They come in and do an ecological inventory of the site. Talk about the different ground covers, different types of vegetation, the surface water systems, where the high priorities are, where other areas are that we can impact. And so that's the first thing we start with. And on this site, north is to the top on this graph. This is the plan. On this diagram, north is to your right. And you'll see we really had two different communities. On the right-hand side, we had about 36 lots, large lots, acre and a half. Number of celebrities bought homes there. The late Flip Saunders was one of the first buyers. Corey Koski from the Twins, John Randall, others from the Vikings lived there. And then to the south, we had 124 lots. And those were two different builders, and those were more about 100-foot wide lots. But you see, by doing that, we were able to preserve some of the high quality environmental areas, particularly in the middle area. We use a system called the stormwater treatment system that Applied Ecological Services designed. In that, what we do is we use the ground to treat the stormwater. We have no stormwater pipe other than going underneath the roads. We had a series of systems where the water would go through the different grasses and prairies. During that, we would have some infiltration. We'd also remove a lot of the contaminants from the water. Eventually, they would go into ponds and eventually into a regional creek. We spent about $150,000 studying the results of that, and after 5 years of study, they came back that, in fact, we had achieved our goals. So we handle all the stormwater on site. We had smaller lots than what's typical in that community at the time, no nerf ponds, no curbs, and narrower streets. I put this up there because all too often, when the developer comes to the city, we view each other as the evil empire. We don't trust each other. When we bought this site, the city immediately put a moratorium on it, and they went through 6 months of planning what they wanted to see happen on the site. We would go to those meetings, and in the meetings they have open forums where they allow people to talk. There are probably about 10 people there. When we get up to talk, the chair of the planning commission said, "We don't want to hear from you." There was that kind of adversarial approach. Over time, we started, what my experience is, if you want to have great communities, you need to work with each other on a collaborative basis. I understand there's some developers that you can't trust, and frankly, I've got some cities I work in. That didn't work. I've got some cities I work in that I don't trust them either. I think also fine. But my advice is, start out, give each other the benefit of the doubt, and until they cross you up, work together on a collaborative basis. Wild Meadows would never have happened without that. We came in with this innovative stormwater system. Nobody quite knew what to expect. There was a lot of questioning, a lot of doubt. And very fortunately for us, what happened, unbeknownst to us, is the Public Works Director for the city on the 4th of July drove down to Prairie Crossings, Illinois, which had a similar system. He spent the day walking around, talking to residents, asking them how it worked. When he came back, he told us about his trip, and he said to me, "Dave, if this system works half as good as what you say it will, we're in." And it has. But it takes that kind of trust, that kind of collaboration to really make a difference. I had a number of grad students call me up. They wanted to do thesis papers on conservation development and why it was the new wave and why buyers would pay more to live in that community. And I had explained to them, our buyers really don't care. They bought in Wild Meadows because of the community it was in and because of the school district. Those were those priorities. Location, location, location. The other thing I want to bring up is that in our business, the independent developers, we have to go to the international markets to raise money. I don't know how many of you went to Drake University, but if you went there, you probably heard about the Opperman family. Vance Opperman is one of my financial partners. Vance Opperman makes investments all around the world. He doesn't invest in my projects because he's particularly beholden to residential development. He likes it because of the return. And when I talk to cities, what I find too often is cities evaluate what their requirements are and their restrictions are based upon what other cities do. It doesn't matter to me if Ankeny's ordinances are more favorable than the ones in Clyde. What matters to me is that I've got to be able to get a rate of return that attracts international investors. If I can't do great projects. And if that happens, if I can't do great projects, what happens is you then end up with the national home builders.
Try the other one.
And the national home builders are very good at what they do, but they normally don't put the kind of effort into creating great communities that we do. Whenever you start something new, you don't know what you don't know, and there's going to be a lot of experiences. This is an example in Wild Meadows. What we did is we had every lot silt fenced on all four sides because we didn't want a compaction of the soils by construction vehicles pulling up in front of the house. We're trying to keep the soils broken up as much as they can so they can infiltrate. So what happens when you pull up the silt fence? You get a foot of no man's land that nobody's bothered to take care of, and you have to treat it later on. We narrowed streets. That was great conceptually. But also when residents started living there, the school buses wouldn't come into the neighborhood because the construction vehicles, they didn't feel safe driving down the roads. If you put silt fences along the lots, where do the construction vehicles park? We went in right away because we're selling lots. We want to have these beautiful native prairie grasses, prairie flowers. But during construction, what happens is that it gets damaged, plus the fact is it takes longer to get rid of the original weeds. And so one of the things we learned is we need to put a cover crop in and be more patient before we start planting our native grasses. We try to restore every parcel, and what I learned is you can't restore everything effectively. Small parcels are just too small to maintain the ecosystems you need. One of the things we learned is that instead of, in Wild Meadows, one of the problems we had is we tried to restore 200 acres to prairie standards. And it's a huge investment and difficult to maintain and very difficult. It takes a long time to get established. One of the things we've learned is to focus instead on small areas and to emphasize those small areas and get them going faster, and so the residents can see that. I would fight with the guys at AES, our environmentalists. They wanted all the homes to have prairie grasses and native grasses and not to have formal lawns. And that's where I came up with what color is the sky they will, because these people are buying $1 million homes. They drive cars. They want pools. They want manicured lawns. We have to be reasonable in our expectations with what we do when we do stormwater conservation. And you have to realize that we still have to be responsive to the marketplace. And one of the things we emphasize is quality over quantity. When you're dealing with stormwater, whether you're planting buffers or whatever it is, you're really a farmer. And I'm a lawyer with a degree in economics. I don't know anything about farming. But I've learned you're subject to weather. You're subject to invasive species that come in from neighboring properties. You're subject to the soil types. You need to maintain it to get it to mature where it can be stable. There are a lot of variables when you start to establish these systems. And my residents don't care. They don't know a canary grass from some beautiful flower. All they know is what a dandelion is. The reason they like Wild Meadows is because of the location and because they butt open space. So while these things are very important to us, we need to recognize that for the most part, the consumer really doesn't care. I've alluded to this earlier, but one of the challenges, we're creating these systems and at the same time we're trying to market homes. And so if you look in the upper left-hand corner, that was when we first created the pond, the stormwater system. And that's what it looked like. And that's where we're selling $500,000 lots adjacent to this. Now over time, you'll see how the vegetation became established and became very attractive. But again, it's one of the challenges of trying to sell a vision today that buyers don't understand. Our buyers would have been just as happy if we put down sod and manicured lawns. Whenever you're creating these buffers, treating your stormwater systems with native grasses, you've got to be aware of the weakest link. All too often we had contractors who would come in and drive across the restored open space because it's the most convenient place for them to get to a backyard. We'd have people dumping things in our preservation areas. In spite of the fact that we put up signage and put up markers, they don't care, they ignore it. The great story I tell people is that my partner was also a home builder. He's a builder in Wild Meadows. We had silt fenced in front of the house. The construction manager goes out there one day, and there's a truck from my partner's good friend who does flooring. One of his employees were out there, drove the truck right over the silt fence so he could back up right to the front of the house, damaged what we had done with the breaking up the silt in front of your yard, damaged the silt fence. The construction manager went up there, started shooting them out, and the guy says, tell somebody who cares. That's one of the real problems we've got in residential construction. You've got so many trades that you have to communicate the importance of this to. It becomes a real challenge. We use landscape escrows. In Wild Meadows, we get $10,000 per lot escrow to try to get the compliance. Next project, we upped it to $20,000. That seems to work better. We stake lot corners. We do a lot of things, but it's still very difficult to get people to understand what you're doing. One of the things we did, we wanted the homeowners to understand why we were doing this. The homeowners have to pay to maintain the open areas. We wanted them to understand why it was important. What we did is we took the realtors, real estate team, we flew them down to Prairie Crossing, Chicago, so they could see for themselves what we were trying to do. We put together a PowerPoint presentation that every homeowner had to view. We put together 10 pages of disclosures that every homeowner had to sign. And still, the number of homeowners that call me up and say, do I have a landscape escrow? What's this for? You just have to educate, educate, educate. So the next project is Locust Hills. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Lake Minnetonka and the Twin Cities, but Lake Minnetonka is an iconic lake. It's where the wealthy in Minneapolis a century ago lived, the Pillsburys, the Danes who started Target, Crosby's who started General Mills, Macmillans, Cargills, they all lived on the lake. And this particular site was owned by the Sweat family. It's about 70 acres. The Sweats were the second generation from Honeywell, the founders of Honeywell. They had a number of equestrian events out there, big horse enthusiasts. This was on the county road, very, very well-recognized property. This is the original bridge that led into the property. That didn't work. There we go. And that's the bridge we built. We had to build a new bridge to replicate it. But that's the site. This is in Wayzata, 70 acres. We created 47 single-family homes. Lot sizes, for the most part, were about a quarter acre. There's 3 lots. You'll see we have 3 lots along the lake. These are about 2.5 acres. Every lot off the lake got 1 slip on the lake, which is a very unique issue. About 2/3 of the site is open space, again, city sewer and water. Early on, we went to the city and said, look, we got 2 ways we can develop this. We can do your traditional development, large lot. We'll get 28 single-family home sites, and you'll have about 6 acres open space. And that complies with the ordinance. Or we could do what the site really calls for, which is a cluster development, a conservation subdivision. We get almost twice as many lots, but we'll go from 6 acres of open space to 45 acres of open space. And the lots will be smaller, there'll be less runoff. And this is important to set the standards, because later on, as you start going through the project, you get individual planning commission members or city council members who don't like the fact that you're taking down that particular tree. You're taking down too many trees. And it's important for us to go back to them and say, look, we gave you a choice. We could have done it the old way, or we could have done it this way. You told us to do it this way. We're doing it that way. You need to step up to the bar and honor your commitment. And those are tough conversations that are sometimes hard to have with elected officials, but sometimes it's important to remember. So some of the low impact or stormwater techniques we use typical stormwater wetlands. We use rain gardens. We did P-rock pond drains, biofiltration systems, pervious pavers and asphalt, and reinforced grass. One of the things we learned with the stormwater wetlands, it's best not to have them next to homes. Sometimes they're not pristine looking, and residents then start to complain. It's important, if you can, to keep them offline as long as you can, because you don't want to have the sedimentation that occurs during construction getting in your ponds. So we have to try to keep them offline, and we try to protect them during construction. They start very native, but it's costly to maintain them in that native status. But they can be absolutely beautiful. As I mentioned to you, the Sweats were very much into equestrian events. This was the stable they had for their horses. We raised the stable 2 feet up. So it'd be out of, it was originally in the floodplain, we wanted to get out of the floodplain, we raised it up 2 feet, completely restored the inside. All the stalls are still there. They now becomes a great amenity for the community. They have weddings there, they have wedding receptions, anniversary parties, graduation parties, and each of the stalls has a table in it so that they can break up groups. Turn out really quite lovely. But this is one of the stormwater infiltration areas, wetlands right next to it. And you see how, again, over time, once we had a couple of years to get the vegetation established, how attractive it is and how effective it becomes. But again, sometimes you'll get algae. This one particular system ties in with the lake, so we can't necessarily control what's in the water. And then residents start to complain. It becomes a difficult issue. They want bubblers, they want fountains, and they can have some effect, but you're still going to have some people who are going to be upset with the appearance. We tried rain gardens. Where these rain gardens go is behind homes that are adjacent to a trail. And they're just very small indentations. We put them in the backyard because we felt that if they're in the side yard or the front yard, the residents would have a tendency to try to landscape them over. Again, you have the issue with silt fence. When the silt fence runs up to the wetland and it's removed, what happens to the area that's disturbed? We had drains going underneath the trails and they became easily plugged. They worked okay, but weren't a great success. And again, you have the problem of trying to explain to the builder why these are important to maintain. We did biofiltration swales, and this is a lesson we learned from Wild Meadows. In Wild Meadows, during the swales, we used your seed mix, and the difficulty was getting that to get established. So our contractor came up with a prairie sod. And you can see it's very attractive. Initially, it was very effective. The problem is, originally we redirected the water to get established, but then over time there wasn't enough water and the upland plants started to encroach. I know that in this area you use concrete streets, we tend to do bituminous. What you'll see when you do a bituminous street, you do 2 layers. You do a base course, then after a couple of years you put the final course on. So you get a couple inches of ridge along that curve, and that stops the water coming in there. The grasses water. The other thing we would do next time is we put cuts in the curb itself so we could get the water redirected even during construction. But it worked out fairly well. We used porous pavers and porous bituminous. The pavers are in the lower left, that's in the clubhouse. That worked fairly well. We put that in right away. What we did is we took a cul-de-sac and we put in pervious pavement in there. As far as I know, it's the first time it's done in a public street. We want to do it as a prototype to test it. What we had to do is first put in a standard asphalt until construction was done, because we didn't want the silt coming down the street and filling up the lenses in the pervious. Then we had to grind it all out and then put down the pervious bituminous. And it's quite expensive, and I'm not sure it's as effective as if it's worth what it costs. We did some reinforced grass. We had a lift station that the city wanted access to. They don't get to it very often. So instead of putting down a typical driveway, we put down reinforced grass. It worked very well. Certainly is a nice way to limit the amount of asphalt. It does require a higher rate of watering than what normal grass would require. But there's an example of what it looks like. It was very attractive. And this community, I gotta tell you, was highly successful. We kept selling units even during the recession. And while it was being marketed, it was probably the most sought after community in the Twin Cities. A lot of very expensive homes were built there. And our residents seemed to really kind of accept what we're doing there. But some of the lessons we learned from that is that people know weeds, they really don't know about native grasses, they don't understand native grasses. We use a less diverse seed mix here, so we lost some diversity, which is kind of unfortunate. But we focused on flowering plants because that's what buyers see. And again, we focused on areas where we had concentration of prairie grasses and prairie flowers. so that we could draw the attention of the buyer rather than trying to do it extensively throughout the entire subdivision. In other parts of the subdivision, we use less expensive and more traditional prairie grasses. For the most part, everything worked. We did get a little bit of invasiveness, but monarch, dip balm, whatever that is. My partner is the expert on that. And we missed on the diversity. We still have the issue of the back of the lots. What happens when the silt pin goes out? How do you make sure that the residents don't start encroaching on the open space? But those are some of the flowers. So then we moved to the west side of Lake Minnetonka, in a suburb called Minnetrista. Minnetrista has about 2,000, 3,000 residents. Again, a lot of large lots, not a lot of sewer and water subdivisions, a lot of horses out there. They got into a fight with the Metropolitan Council, which is our regional government. The Metropolitan government provides sewer services, and they want cities to have a certain amount of density where they have sewer services, so they can justify the cost, and Minnetrista wasn't meeting their requirements. So Minnetrista and Mid-Council came to an agreement that this site was going to have 1,071 lots. I don't know how many of you have heard of the Carlson families, but the Carlson family used to own Radisson Hotels, TGI Fridays, Carlson Wagonly. Kurt Carlson bought the north 200 acres back in the 70s. He was going to have a family estate there. That didn't work out. And about 10 years ago, they bought the southern 280 acres. We were very fortunate that the Carlsons owned the property, and that some of it they had had over 40 years, because we needed patient capital on this one. They brought us in as a development partner. They have no experience doing residential. It took us 6 years to get the approvals, 54 permits from 17 different agencies, and then we had the Met Council with 1,071 lots. This is the site overall. It also includes this 40 acres. You'll see the road originally came down here. Maybe I stand right there. The road originally came down to Highway 7. We had to realign the road. We had to put in the roundabout. We had to negotiate with the Park District to the south to move the road, so it was going to impact some of their property. We had to work with the county. And then in the middle, you'll see a green area by a water tower. That was owned by another individual, 40 acres with a conservation easement across it. But there's 8,800 feet of shoreline on Lake Minnetonka. And this project's still underway. A lot of it was used for farm. There's a heavy degradation, huge erosion. That's my partner Paul, standing in that gully. We call it the Jurassic Park photo. Paul's about 5'10", so you can see how deep that gully is. Again, we had Applied Ecological Services doing environmental evaluation for us on the site. They came back with showing us where the high priorities areas were, and certainly the woods were a significant priority. The site has a great deal of topography on it. There's 132 feet in elevation difference between the highest point until you get down to the lake. And that's part of what caused some of that erosion that you saw. That's the plan we came up with. This is the single family, about 208 lots. 381 lots were smaller single family. The first one were about ½ acre to an acre in size. The second group is about ¼ acre in size. We have about 484 units of what we call multifamily, which is twin homes, townhomes, small lots, and then condominiums. And frankly, what we did, we had challenges protecting the open space and trying to create the open space we wanted. So in the lower left-hand corner, you'll see the pink. That's where we have some of what we call condominiums, multi-story, multi-family apartments, and we just dumped a bunch of units in there so we could be at 1,071. It's hard to see the scale of this because it's such a large site. But for example, this area in here, 200 feet wide of green space. And so it's one of the things we try to do is create a meaningful open space wildlife corridor that we use for treating stormwater. About a third of the site is permanent open space. There's your parks. You can see the wetlands that were there. I think we impacted 1 acre of wetland in the entire project. But the buffers, notice that the buffers we had to create around the wetlands are equal, if not a little bit larger in size than the wetlands themselves. And this also becomes a challenge, especially if you have a number of small wetlands. Your buffers for protection can be greater than the amount of the wetlands themselves. About 30 acres we used for stormwater treatment, and we had sedimentation basins that we used for infiltration. There's 106 of them throughout the site. So this is probably one of the more complex projects we've worked on. I see that your keynote speaker in your conference in October, Wes Saunders. Wes and I served on a committee of the MPCA studying stormwater, and we gave them the similar presentation. Because of the multi-jurisdictions, agencies involved, how do you get everybody around the table? Everybody has a different interest, different biases. The city has their bias, the regional park has theirs, the watershed district has theirs, and mine was enough is enough. We try to be proactive and try to work with different communities and different agencies. We've done this several times. And the real challenge as developers is that one agency can have their bias, and if they let that bias get in the way, they could kill the entire project for everybody. What we did is we brought all the agencies together. They agreed voluntarily to participate. First step we did was to get them to all agree on what the rules were. What models do we use? Because everybody has different standards. What are the assumptions for those rules and the models? And then we agreed on modeling existing conditions. And then the real challenge was to model what we were proposing. This entire process took 5 months. And again, this is why we're very fortunate that we had the Carlsons. In my business, time is money. And to sit for 5 months just trying to figure out what the rules were going to be for stormwater, in many cases, is cost prohibitive. And so as you start working on your concepts and what you're planning to do, I would encourage you that if you have a unified system, at least with multiple jurisdictions, it really is very beneficial for everybody. As a development thing, I'm always saying to cities is, just tell me what the rules are. Don't make me guess at them. If I know what the rules are, then I can quickly sit down and say, yes, I can do the project, or no, I can't. And then I can't come back to you and complain about the rules because I knew we were on the front end. One of the real challenges with stormwater is what are the infiltration rates? What do you have for soils? When we did the soil surveys out in Woodland Cove, the soil surveys provided by the government showed us that we had C's and B's type soils. But when we went out there, what we found is we had C's and D's. And even within the B's, if you look at this, depending upon the different types of soils, you have different types of infiltration rates. You'll see that for the sandy silty, we have infiltration rates of 0.6 of an inch, and for organic silt, we have 0.3 of an inch. Same types of soils, both B's. So now I go to the regulator, and one regulator will say to me, we'll take the average, we'll assume you at 0.45. Another regulator will say, no, I'm going to be conservative, I'm going to assume 0.3. Now I'm losing the advantage of the other soils I have. Regulator 3 will say, I don't care, build it, once we build, we'll test it and see if it works. Think about that. I'm investing millions of dollars, I'm going to be putting these infiltration systems into your standards, and if they don't work, now you want me to tear them out and do them again. That's a risk that most developers are not willing to assume. When you do your infiltration testing, you get incredible variability in the soils, even within a distance of 20 feet. And because those soils can change so much, how do you start to design for this? And again, it's open to wide interpretation. In Minnesota, we have what's called the Stormwater Manual. It's put out by the MPCA. It's supposed to be a guide. The cities treat it as a gospel. That's good and bad. It's good because we have some consistency. It's bad because then you get some inflexibility when you run into problems or soils that don't work within the intent of that manual. And what we did, this just shows some examples of variability. We were fortunate we got a graduate student at the University of Minnesota who was working on his thesis, and he got a bunch of students to come out, and he helped us do a bunch of soil samples that really helped us understand the site better. But in some cases, you've got regulators that want you to test every infiltration basin. The cost of a test is $3,500. I already told you I had 106 infiltration basins. That's over $350,000 just to do the testing. That's before we even start designing and constructing. And that's some pictures of the testing they did. And so as a, working with the different jurisdictions in the MPCA, they answer the question, well, what happens if I get tight soils, if I can't do infiltration? And they say, well, we'll have mitigation options. This, I'm going to get into one of my pet peeves. I've served on 2 different agencies as they're adopting rules for stormwater. And my position to each of them was, we need to know what this costs the development community. What's the cost? And each time I was assured I would be told that they would make that determination, and they never did. It's one of the things Wes and I fought over. They told us that we'll give you mitigation. You can mitigate for different, if you can't get it, you can mitigate. Fortunately with the Carlsons, as we were designing this, they're willing to spend some extra money so we can start to test what those alternatives were. In Minnesota, when we first started this project, the standard was 1/2 inch of rain needs to be infiltrated within 48 hours. Right after the time that we sent our application in, the new standard was adopted of 1 inch in 48 hours. That comes to 1 acre-foot. So here's some of the alternatives that the agencies would recommend. Infiltration, which is a standard, costs anywhere from $25,000 to $100,000 per acre-foot, and you need an acre of land. That doesn't work. You can do an infiltration trench, and you can see the costs there, $135 to $150, although it does take up less land. Or you can save trees. Trees that we know are great for stormwater infiltration. The root system is great. But to do 1 acre credit, you got to have 120 acres of woods. Or you can plant new trees at a cost of $3.7 million. Or amended soils at 4,500 an acre. You need about 25 acres, so you can see what that cost is, plus you need up 25 acres, or you can do filtration. We showed these numbers to the engineer for our watershed district, and he agreed with these numbers. And so, as you're looking at your alternatives, as you're looking at ways people can mitigate if you can't get infiltration work, I would strongly implore you that what you need to do is look at the alternatives you're suggesting. Are they really practical? Find out what they cost. Another question is, what are you trying to control? Are you trying to control volume? Trying to control rate? Are you trying to reduce phosphorus? Reduce the pollution? There are interrelationships between these, and it takes time. And it takes time to understand this interrelationship. At Woodland Cove, while we were under the old standards, we thought we could exceed the new standards. We went from 3.3 to 4% of the site for infiltration to 6 to 8% of the site, and we just barely met the new standards. So as you start to increase the amount of stormwater that you want to be retained on site, it can be surprising how much land and how much money it costs. Going back to what I was showing you about the infiltration pond, Woodland Cove is still under development. It's about half built out. We're doing a new phase. We originally were going to put in an infiltration pond. The cost of that pond was about $75,000. For it to work effectively in infiltration, what the builder decided he wanted to do was, instead of taking that risk of what happens if it doesn't work, we could take the water and use it for watering common areas in the townhome development. Originally, that seemed to be kind of a break-even. Last week, we got the final numbers. It's about $75,000 more to do that, but there's another way to handle stormwater. I think the builder is still going to do that because of the certainty of what his solution is. As I noted earlier, when you talk about these different issues, and then you've got to add buffers to it, it takes up an enormous amount of land. And how much protection do we need? And I'm not saying protecting stormwater, protecting our waters is not important. But take a look at wetland mitigation. At least in Minnesota, if you impact a wetland, you've got to mitigate it 2 for 1. Why is that? Because we're trying to be overly protective. All too often, we look at the downside, we don't necessarily appreciate and recognize the upside. Again, I showed you this picture. That's the stormwater pond, or the infiltration basin when we started, and that's the same basin 5 years later. You see the establishment of the vegetation. That vegetation is very effective at creating infiltration opportunities. So we know that over time, if we put plugs in and put plantings in there, the infiltration rate will increase. But again, here's an example. You'll see that infiltration base in the background, that didn't get established. What do we do now? We're currently working with the watershed district to try to find a solution. Our solution is let's put some plugs and plants in there. Let's get some vegetation established. We know that over time, that vegetation will break up the soils and cause infiltration to occur. But some regulators aren't very receptive to that. And it goes back to the question of what is the developer expected to do? Are you expecting the developer to build to a standard that you acknowledge? Or are you going to require the builder to build to a performance standard that nobody can be sure is going to be achieved? So we're concerned about implementation. We're concerned about the cost versus benefit. It's somewhat difficult to calculate. Who maintains these areas? We have some cities where they're maintained by the city, and other areas the cities don't want their responsibility because they're trying to pull down taxes. So what they're doing is they're forcing the homeowners association to maintain it. Is that fair? When the residents throughout the city are maintaining other stormwater systems? Do you want homeowners associations to have this responsibility? So that's a gully again. That's what it looks like today. It's very effective, it's worked very well. And we're reducing the amount of phosphates and running into Halsted Bay and Lake Minnetonka. We're having our role in it. There are a number of other factors as well. Along the shoreline, it's a designated wetland. So the shoreline is a wetland buffer. Again, it's an area where we work with a local jurisdiction. Under their rules, you can only have a 25-foot opening along the lake. These homes along the lake start at about 1.7 million. You know those people want to have views. So we worked with the watershed district. What they agreed is we could have a 50-foot view corridor instead of 25-foot. They agreed we could take out trees less than 6 inches in diameter. They agreed that we could trim up the trees so we could see view sheds underneath the trees. What it's done is open up the ground cover for the sunlight. We have a much more vibrant vegetation on the shoreline. And the homeowners have views. It's kind of a win-win for everybody. But before this was all reed canary grass. Now it's very attractive prairie plantains and flowers. And I think because of that, the homeowners will help us maintain it. There's a lot of demands on housing. Watershed and wetlands is just one of them. We've been asked to increase wetland buffers. We're being asked to preserve more and more trees. More and more cities have tree ordinances with huge consequences if you take out more than the allowed amount. Public officials want wildlife corridors. They want to maintain areas for the wildlife to cross. Wild meadows or Woodland Cove is part of that system, and that's where we have a significant wildlife corridor. Park dedication, street right-of-ways. The planners want narrower streets. They want to reduce stormwater runoff. The city engineer and the snowplowers want wider streets. Trails, fire sprinklers, increased demand for energy efficiency, high density. People want housing to become more affordable. It's also easy to get focused on your area of concern, which in this case is stormwater, but all of it impacts housing, the price of housing, what your residents or your future residents are going to be paying for housing, how affordable housing is going to be. So I ask you to keep that in mind, that you're just one piece of the puzzle. These numbers are from about 4 years ago, but based on the National Association of Home Builders. If a home increases from a price of $225,000 to $235,000, you priced out 4% of the market, 2.3 million households. I tried to go online Sunday to look at the Des Moines Board of Realtors website to see what the average price of a home was here. I couldn't find that number, just that the price was going up. But in the Twin Cities last month, it was $271,000. Housing's getting expensive. We need places for our teachers, our policemen, our kids to live. My last pet peeve is how we share the cost. I can only speak to the Twin Cities, but in the Twin Cities, we've been remiss in properly treating stormwater over the years. Now we're coming to the recognition that we need to deal with it. And a number of cities are creating major systems to handle stormwater. But what they're doing is they're imposing the cost on new development. There's a very popular suburb in the eastern suburb of Twin Cities called Woodbury. Woodbury has a $40,000 per acre area charge for stormwater. If you handle all the stormwater, they'll reduce it to $20,000. I did a community there, 200 acres. We finished that community 10 years ago, and I can promise you not one thimble of stormwater has ever left that site. I had to pay $400,000 to the regional stormwater treatment system. And the reason that happens is that the council members, the policymakers, don't want to raise taxes for the current residents to pay their share. Everybody in the community of Woodbury benefits from the system, but the burden's only being placed on new development. And I submit to you that that's not fair. That's not good public policy. It's very difficult to get the development community to support it because they know it's not fair. Again, going back to what I talked about at the beginning, the need for collaboration. It's important that we all work together. We all pay our percentage of the cost. I don't know of a developer who will tell you, at least I don't know of a good developer who will tell you they're not willing to pay their share of the cost. It rankles us when we're expected to pay for past sins that we weren't responsible for. And the elected officials won't step up and take responsibility for their share of that. Do we have any elected officials here, now that I beat you up? And the reason I ask that is one of the things I missed that I want to raise, and I'm probably preaching to the choir here. Elected officials need to trust their staff. If you're going to create a great community, especially if you're going to do something innovative, you've got to trust your staff to work out the bugs. You've got to trust your staff to negotiate with the developer. I can't do it at a council meeting. You can't effectively do it at a council meeting. You can't do it in a public forum. It's got to be done across the table. People agreeing on what their common needs are, what their common goals are, and what they can give and what they can't give. And that can't effectively occur at a city council meeting. So I'd encourage all of you to go back to your respective jurisdictions and tell them I said that they've got to trust you. With that, we got time for questions. Thank you for the opportunity. I hope that was worth your while.
What questions do we have?
Can you expand a little bit on the maintenance implications? You talked about a little bit about maintenance being part of the city's responsibility, maintenance being part of the HOA. In your experience, can you expand upon that a little bit, the pros and cons?
Probably the biggest challenge with having the HOA is having the HOA commit to it. In Wild Meadows, we went through a very elaborate process to maintain the open space. We put an easement over the whole thing running to the Minnesota Land Trust. The Minnesota Land Trust has to go out there and do inspections. If it's not being properly maintained, the city can impose, if the HOA won't take the steps to do it, the city can impose an assessment against the HOA to do it. The residents, they don't care. And so they still fight it. I don't think they're going to be very successful because of the measures we put in place. But as I said, residents don't care. So if you have the HOA maintaining it, they're trying to keep HOA fees down. You're trying to maintain the vegetation so it's effectively working. There's a real conflict there. There are some ways around it, but, you know, and the other piece of it is, in a way, even though this is, the stormwater is being handled on the surface, it's a public infrastructure. And why should the HOA be maintaining this public infrastructure when the city maintains everything else? One thing we have done, and this again may be unique to Minnesota, when we first did Wild Meadows, as much as everybody hoped our system would work, there was some skepticism of what do we do if it doesn't. So the city created a special assessment district just covering that development. And it gives them the power that if this system fails, the surface system we put in place, if that fails, the city could go in and put in a traditional storm sewer system and assess the residents for that. So it did give the city some precautions, some safety. That community's been built out for at least 10 years. There aren't any issues. It's working very effectively. But that's another opportunity.
Could you just maybe reference what is that traditional storm sewer system as it is different than what we saw here?
Well, what it normally is you're going to have a lot of underground pipe, and then it goes to a series of ponds. And we have a series of ponds. The first pond is going to handle infiltration, start to do the cement sediment removal, contamination removal, and then once it gets to a certain level, then it goes to the next pond, and then it enters the water system, whatever it is.
And the reason for these 3 case studies, and the reason you went with the techniques that you did employ, was because you thought they'd be more effective and produce a more valuable product.
Right. We're trying to mimic nature, and by doing that, it's more effective at removing nutrients, phosphates, and different contaminations on the site.
But is it also financially?
And in all these cases, I think in all the cases, we've been able to handle most of the stormwater on site. And so we're really not contributing to the major systems. So it's cleaner, and it reduces the amount of discharge off-site. But it's challenging, it's tricky.
Maybe, sorry, one last one, kind of ties into that. So is that why you are consulting with an environmental company up front early on to be able to kind of figure out the complications?
Absolutely. On behalf of Newland, I'm in the process of acquiring 435 acres in Rosemont, which is in the southern suburbs. And on the way down here, we're in our due diligence phase. We're hoping to start planning and laying out a concept in October. And there's an hour conference call on the way down here with my planner, my engineer, and the environmental consultants to start to talk about how do we evaluate where the best places for our infiltration, what are the features we want to preserve, how can we make this a better place for our residents. Frankly, our bias is that if we have a healthy community with healthy ecosystems, that's a healthier place for our residents and it's better for our communities. And so yes, they play a critical role in what we do. I don't always listen to them, but we hear them.
Do you do any conservation developments for lower priced housing, or are they all higher end?
The one I just showed you, Woodland Cove, that's a whole range of product. They'll have some townhomes that's probably in the upper 200s. What Carlson did is they kept about 45 of the custom lots. They've kept for custom builders that they're developing and selling. The rest of it we sold to Mattamy Homes, which is now pulled out of the market. And MI Homes has taken their place. And they're a typical regional builder with a wide range of housing types. So homes in the upper 2s, low 3s, up to a couple $1 million. Yes?
In the Twin Cities, are you able to deliver lots that are affordable for public safety and teachers and that whole income level?
It's a challenge. New home, the average new home right now is about $420,000. And the reason it's working is because of low interest rates. What the builders are doing and developers, again, in Woodland Cove, the last one I showed you, Mattamy's come up with a 40-foot lot. It's a detached, we call it a detached villa. This freestanding home, they'll have exterior maintenance by an HOA, but it's on a 40-foot lot. And it's a very attractive home. It looks really nice. But a lot of cities are resisting lots that small. But it costs us about $1,500 a front foot to develop a lot. So if I can cut 10 feet off, I've just saved $15,000 off the price of my lot. And I'm not sure if these dynamics work down here, but in Twin Cities, the whole package, house and lot, is about 4 times your lot value. So if I save $15,000 off the lot, I've cut $60,000 off the price of the package. And that's something we need to be doing for affordability, to build, so the working class people in this country have a place, a new home they can buy. And all too often we talk about affordable housing, people think we're talking about low income. We're not. Well, thank you again.
We'll take just a quick 4-minute stretch break, and then we'll get our panelists up here, and we'll go on to the next part of our program.
Dave is going to join the panel conversation, and then we have Joe Petrosinski with Hubble. He's the Vice President for Land Development. Did I get that right, Joe? And then Doug Olendijk, who's the Development Director for the City of Urbandale. And then Greg Pierce, Clive, I know better. Sorry about that. Yeah, I live in Urbandale, and we we have a piece of Walnut Creek behind our house, and the picture of the guy standing at the bottom of the trench, I will call it, is what we have. And then Greg Pierce, who's my colleague at RDG Planning and Design, and he'll be speaking a little bit about what Ankeny has been doing in terms of stormwater planning. No one from Ankeny was able to join us today, but they asked Greg if he could fill in for them in that regard. Not that he's speaking for Ankeny, but he can talk about what they're doing from a planning standpoint. And then Tim Moorman, City Manager for the City of Waukee, also previously with Ankeny, so might be able to help us out there a little bit as well. We'd like to get this thing started by giving the mic over to Joe. He's got some slides, and we'll kind of start talking about some of the work that Hubble has been doing, including, I believe, Grace Station, Grace Landing, some of that work.
What a beautiful presentation by Dave. I told him earlier we need to head over to District 36, grab a beer so I can cry with him together on the conservation development. As you know, Hubble has 6 conservation developments across the Des Moines metropolitan area, and we went and visited many different sites across the Midwest, including those in Minnesota and in Chicago, to learn from their experiences. And I will say we still are learning, and many of the things that he's experiencing up north are the exact same things. Look in the room, Mr. Katie, representatives from Johnston, Waukee, all the different communities we're in. I think we all can collectively agree that we share the same issues when we're trying to maintain conservation development and manage stormwater sites, all surrounding around the biggest issue about affordable housing. So I'm going to move over from our conservation design and start talking about a different approach that we're taking through a collaboration with the City of Des Moines. And if I get things wrong, I have one of our engineers who worked on the project through RDG here, Greg, worked on this basin design in Grace Station. Grace Station is located just north of Grace Lake on the Raccoon River. Many people are familiar with the site as an old industrial site that was contaminated. Proud to say Rita Connor's here with us. And I'm going to actually give Rita a lot of props because what you're about to hear today would not have happened without this woman. She is tenacious, she's steadfast, and she doesn't take no for an answer. And Greg, you can probably concur with me that this approach to stormwater management would not happen without that woman sitting in the back of the room. So thank you, Rita. Grace Station, so we all know that there's a levee that protects Des Moines. But that levee has an unfortunate circumstance that's associated with it. Where does the water go on the other side of the levee? Well, it has to be pumped out. And there's about 320 acres, is that right, Greg? That flows into the community that we wanted, this urban community that we want to develop downtown. And it's all collected in, right now, 3 basins. One that we call the Dark Pond, and then 2 others that the city established in order to make sure that downtown doesn't fill up like a bathtub. Water can move out of the area behind the levee and into the river system during major flood events. This graphic shows an area extending all the way beyond even the central Gateway Art Park in Des Moines, all the way north, this pretty large watershed that flows into this area. So what are we doing? We're taking water from downtown and storing them in these very communist-looking stormwater basins. My family is from Poland, Warsaw, Poland. A name like Petrozinski, Pietruszyński in Polish, for the Polish in the audience. This kind of looks a lot where my great-grandfather and grandmother lived. Really stark. We just collect the water in this area, very engineering-looking, and we pump it away. Dirty water. There's not really much to it other than that. It's just a safety mechanism. Goes to a very large pump house. When we were designing our community, one of the themes from Plan DSM, one of the themes from all the collaborative efforts from this group, everybody working together, was to say, let's think about stormwater differently. If we're going to redevelop downtown, let's try to incorporate systems that can clean water before it moves on. So working with planning staff at Des Moines, working with RDG, our design experts, we came up with systems of linear park systems, trails that can convey water through what we call green streets, greenways, and move them through the stormwater buffer areas and into a larger stormwater basin. But that stormwater basin, we reinvented it into a system that became a treatment train that slowly moved water through the basin, and also acted not only as a water treatment facility, but a way to add value to the area and create a regional park system, an extension of the river moving north. Grays Lake moving north. Now, you'll see we also connected it with a pedestrian bridge that's going to break ground here in September. The wetland design is very simple. Water comes in from the north end of the site, and there's various ponds where the water can stand still and move down through the treatment train. And it moves through a variety of different plantings, wetland grasses, to clean the water before it moves outside. Of course, in a high event, it's going to blow right through there. But for most of the events downtown, the combination of what we're doing upstream, the majority of water from our side is going to move to some kind of treatment mechanism, much like you heard in the earlier presentation. Clean the water. And then regionally, that water that was once just pumped in this basin and pumped out is also going to move slowly through the system. Here's a 3D view of what we're planning to do. This is our first phase of our urban neighborhood that's underway right now. And just to give you a scale, this is the treatment train that is going to be built. Important to note is, part of this collaboration effort was not only Hubble Realty Company coming up with the design and working with the city on the design, but the city actually believed that this is such an important component of downtown that they are actually taking over the responsibility to build it and maintain it. Now, there is some collaboration between the developer and the city, but the city felt that this is really a system that's public infrastructure, and they're taking it on as not only their public works project, but taking it on as a means to extend their park system. So to give you scale, we're building, this is where a neighborhood is under construction right now. We are building a trail system that will connect downtown directly to Grays Lake. This bridge is going to be under construction, pedestrian bridge this fall. And this basin is going to start, hopefully, knock on wood, Rita, right? It's going to start later on this year. Great. So this is just to give you scale. It's going to handle a good portion of water downtown. The idea is, like you saw in the earlier pictures, is to establish native wetland grasses and create this kind of environment. A place where we can route people so they not only enjoy the open space, the nature that's on the river and Grays Lake, but it's also what we're going to incorporate into our design is a means in which people can learn. We're going to stamp the concrete as we move down the trail system with educational pieces to teach people what's happening in the area. That's in addition to all the marketing efforts we have with our residents, teaching them why this is a conservation development, how it works, how it functions. Communication, communication, communication. It's really funny how people forget really what it's all about, so we have to keep reminding them over and over again. Here's another example that drove our design. This came from RDG. This is what we're going to be building in Des Moines, in collaboration with the city of Des Moines. It's just a graphic rendering, a more close-up view of how the system is going to work. We are actually building condominiums that will be up against that basin, and we're going to try to capture the value of that amenity with the river and Grays Lake with those condominiums to add value to the downtown area. So this is just a brief overview. This is a close-up of how the basin plantings are going to look for the first phase of our development. We put some of our higher-end homes up against that basin. These are actual 3D renderings of how it's going to look. And then this is the walkway that's going to go to the bridge that connects Grays Lake to the neighborhood and downtown. And the area surrounding it is going to be planted with natives, again, to treat stormwater. Here's a pedestrian bridge that will link the two together. It's a very brief presentation. I just want to show you what's coming and show you how collaborative effort between the developer and the city of Des Moines can accomplish great things. Now, I know we're doing that with many of you in the room. That's the reason why conservation developments are working. City of Waukee, other places. And thank you for all your efforts in working with us and doing exactly as you said. It takes a collaborative effort between developer and the city to understand those costs and come up with real ways to make things move forward.
Thank you very much. The rest of our panelists are going to make a few comments, and then we'll move into the questions area. So, Doug?
Speaking for how we kind of got to where we are in the city of Clive, the big message is, frankly, reinforced what appears to be every couple of years now. In June, another flooding event, flooded out 50 or so properties. We have this, again, reoccurring on a relatively frequent basis, and these events that we're having are not even what is considered to be the big one, not the 100-year type of rainfall. So we're continually getting beat up by these 20-year, 30-year rain events, and we've been, again, dealing with this since our existence, which is near 60 years, and we've also had stormwater management in place for the better part of 30 years. So after that 30-year time period, we've kind of gotten to the point of saying, maybe this isn't the right thing. Maybe we're not doing something right. Maybe we can't necessarily engineer our way out of it. Sorry, guys. So that's kind of what brought us to the idea that we've got to come up with something different. We took a strong look at ourselves in the mirror and said, look, we don't have this thing right. We got to come up with something different. And as scary as that is, that's what you got to do. You got to decide that you got to think about it in a different way. So that's kind of our approach to it. We've spent a lot of time looking at how stormwater is being managed in other places, other parts of the country, looking at how development is doing it, how cities are managing it, and trying to bring those practices back here. And honestly, the way that we look at it at this particular point is it is a rate and volume issue for Clive. It's a flooding issue. It's not a water quality issue. Water quality is great, and we know that we'll get the benefits of it if we can manage the rate and volume better. We also know that as we finish developing in our community, we can't penalize that development area. As was said, we can't make them make our flooding conditions better. There's not a solution to that that's going to come from the development. But what we're asking is that that new development doesn't have an adverse impact downstream. So can that new development area manage its water on site or mitigate or whatever it might be for rate and volume? And then kind of going along with that is if we can get the development to do their part, we as the city also need to understand and reflect, just as was said, stormwater is a utility, bottom line. And think about it from the perspective of how much money goes into managing your water system or your sanitary system or your roadway. And then think about how much is being spent on stormwater. I guarantee it's a very, very minor percent is what you're spending in stormwater at the moment. And I think that's what needs to kind of be rethought, is how do you bring the resources together to manage this infrastructure. And that's, again, where we're spending a lot of time now trying to figure out how to get those capital investments, how to get those operational costs, how do we be good partners with the development communities and with our homeowners associations, because ultimately the city is the one that's going to be there over the long term. So how do we figure out ways to most efficiently manage those systems over the long term so that they can continue to be assets and not just liabilities? So, you know, again, we've kind of reached that point because we have specific problems. Some of you all have got similar problems, and others of you will, I guarantee you, have problems in the future if we keep doing things the way we've done. So that's kind of where we're at, and be happy to answer any questions when we get to that.
Thank you. So then I'm going to speak a little bit to what the city of Ankeny is undertaking in terms of stormwater management right now.
Certainly. At least I can speak on behalf of what I'm currently working with them on. right now, we're in the middle of a planning process with the city of Ankeny. They've contracted with us at RDG to work on a stormwater assessment and management plan for their entire community. A couple things really drove that decision for them of why they felt like it was necessary at this time to do that. First, I think most of us in this room realize the rapid growth that Ankeny is experiencing. I think recently they were named the 4th largest city over 50,000 population in the country, 4th largest rate of growth. Right now there's 67,000 people in Ankeny, and over the next 30 or 40 years they're expecting that could increase to as many as 130,000 people. So rapid growth. I think some of the recent years they've had up to 1,500 different residential building permits in a single year. So very rapid growth. There needs to be an understanding as that growth occurs what's in their system right now. And then as Amy mentioned in some of our earlier presentations, there have been problems with past, some of the ways things have been done in the past. They had a number of stream restoration projects that was caused by erosion of streams in areas that had already been developed, where they spent more than $10 million to make repairs, to repair erosion and other things that had happened from past development systems and how stormwater was managed. So they want to be more forward-thinking and, first of all, try to identify areas that still need work. So there's really two approaches. One is a field assessment of all their streams. So we're going through a number of their streams, about 13 miles of urban streams in their community, looking at the conditions from areas that they haven't worked to assess what needs to be done, what infrastructure improvements are necessary to make repairs, both short and long-term fixes. And the other thing is to look back at some of the work that's already been done and assess some of the streams that they've already repaired and see, well, are those improvements holding up? Are there things we can learn from those repairs that would guide future design practices on future stream restoration projects? The other side of this is really a community-wide GIS analysis, looking not just what's in the city today, but their entire planning area that's covered by their comprehensive plan that extends 2 or 3 miles out in every direction from their city limits, and defining the watersheds more accurately from LiDAR information and from their storm sewer maps. Where's the water coming from? What are the properties of those watersheds as far as impervious cover? How recent is the development in that area? What are the soils like? So we can get a better handle on how the water would be expected to move off of those areas. And then use that to kind of feed back into the conditions of the streams. Are there any things that we can learn? And then finally, that too will add into it an analysis of what is their current policy. Are there changes that need to be made or refinements? Are there things that could be clearer so that it's, the rules are better understood by everybody, so that there's more clear definition on what should and shouldn't happen? Are there any changes that are necessary? They haven't really come to those conclusions yet. We're still in the assessment phase and learning the data. But that's one of those things that they'll look at towards the end of the project is what can we learn? Are there any changes that are necessary, yes or no? And what would those be? So that's kind of in a nutshell what they're doing. I should mention the assessments that we've been doing. We've been doing both field assessments and collecting video. We've also been using drone quadcopter footage to collect information from the air. And one other thing that really wasn't in the initial plan for this, but recent circumstances have changed. They had a rain event on June the 30th and then overnight into the 1st of July where they received anywhere from 8 to 10 inches of rain in a 3-hour period. So that really tested their systems and identified problems that really had never been seen before. So that also is being included in this whole assessment program.
Tim.
Thank you, Pat. Waukee is a growth community and that has a lot of opportunities to the west and some a little bit to the southeast. And we also have to be situated pretty near the beginning of waterways. So we have Little Walnut Creek that begins just north of Waukee, and we have Sugar Creek. So one of the things that we're working on, because we're growing and we have a chance to do it right as we grow, is to look at ways where we can manage that water before it goes into those waterways. A few examples I just want to share with you. One is the Kettlestone project, which is off of Grand Prairie Parkway, the new interchange. It's about 1,100 acres. It goes north of the interstate all the way to Hickman. And that whole area, we've master planned that. We have regional stormwater detention, so the city has built several ponds that wind their way through that whole area that collects all the water. It also is collecting water for development, and it manages the water before it exits Waukee into Sugar Creek. When we go to the north, we have 3 major projects we're working on there. One is the city is working with the school district on developing 160 acres of land to have a new high school, but also a sports complex. And in that area, it's kind of a go-through area for a lot of water from the west, just north of Hickman. And that area, what we're trying to do there is build a 14-acre pond that manages that water before it goes into Little Walnut Creek. We're also working with the school on how to have stormwater quality there. We're working on ways to catch debris before it gets into there. We're working on a floating wetlands concept for that pond to make sure that the water has some good quality as it leaves Waukee into Little Walnut Creek. We're also looking at acquiring about 70 acres of land, or at least impacting 70 acres of land at the headwaters of Little Walnut Creek that we can manage the water before it goes into there and certainly manage the quality of it. And then finally, I point out that we're working with Apple on their 2,000 acres. About 800 of those acres flows toward Little Walnut Creek. They're very environmentally conscious. They have some preliminary plans we've seen that really do a great job of managing stormwater. So if you put all of that together and then some of the planning we have through our comp plan for the western part of the community, as you go west of Hickman to the south, we hope to impact the water that goes out of Waukee into these streams and creeks through more of a comprehensive approach.
So we're going to turn it over and get your questions in a moment. I'm going to kind of get this kicked off. I'd like to take advantage of the fact that we have a couple of wonderful developers in the room and ask a little bit from them in terms of council. We have a lot of city folks here, city managers, engineers, folks who are involved in city development, all kinds of folks. And so what needs to happen to improve that partnership between developer and city in a way that starts to deliver these kinds of projects that Dave's been talking about, that you've been talking about, Tim, in a way that is timely, cost-effective, can get to that affordable housing piece. It doesn't get blown out of the water, pardon the pun, by virtue of the timeline, the expense, the challenges.
What I often find, I started my career as a city planner, as you all know, working for Des Moines and Ames. And coming into the private sector, it was a big eye-opener to understand all the costs involved in the land development process. What I find out is developers are very good at understanding those costs, but rarely do they ever want to share it. And then the trust breaks down between the public official and the developer. The approach that I like to take is to bring in elected officials and just be transparent about it. Show, teach, educate, and how it works on our side. And don't be afraid to share the return necessary for the equity markets to make the project work, because without making return on equity, none of us will survive. Sometimes we're using people's 401k funds, some investment portion of that in these development projects, and showing what we have to meet, showing where the houses have to be in order for them to sell, sharing that information with them can move things forward. I know it's worked at Gray Station. It's worked in other communities across the metro. By just being transparent really helps, and teach how the process works for the developer. Because I think once people can connect the dots, then things can start moving forward. It does take breaking down those trust barriers, and I think that's one way developers can help.
Sharing my profit margin scares the bejesus out of me. And the reason very simply is that, I can tell you, when we approach Van Sopperman and invest in one of our projects, I have to have an IRR in the low 20s. With the work I've done with Newland and also working with other, I can't talk about what the returns Newland requires, but they're fairly consistent with what I find with other investment funds. And the IRR needs to be in the upper teens, closer to 20%, net margins at 20%, gross margins of 30%. To people who don't work in this industry, that seems extraordinary. And, I've had a number of times we've had public hearings where we were requesting deviation, and residents will say, well, if it wasn't for the greedy developer, especially if they're getting 2% returns on their savings accounts. And so, I think because of lack of understanding, and then the pressure goes on the city officials, and the city officials then start blaming me for being greedy, and I'm just competing in the international investment community. So, but I do believe that, at least for us, we come in, we try to be straight with the city, and it certainly helps when you've had a 25-year reputation that they can then contact other cities. Our word is our bond. We'll come in and tell you what our expectations are, what we're trying to do, what we're looking for, what our goals are, see if they coincide with the city. The one we did in Woodland Cove and Minnetrista was kind of funny because the city council and planning commission were very dysfunctional. They hired a consultant to help them. And basically what he did is he told us to back off. Because he said, Dave, I need to get the council up to where you are. But I think, I certainly do disclose specific issues. This is what the impact's going to be. If I've got to do this and I got to take this away, this is what the impact's going to be. But you've also got to get councils and staffs that want to do collaborative things. And say we're working on right now in Rosemont. I'm looking to do some 40-foot lots. My understanding is I got a community development director who doesn't want anything less than 60. Well, if I'm going to have open space for stormwater, if I'm going to have meaningful trail systems, if we're going to have wildlife corridors, I got to get my lots. I got to reduce it. Now, I've got a mayor who tells me he has no problem hopping on a plane and going looking at product elsewhere. We'll see how that goes. But I think everybody has to come to the table with the desire to make better communities and do a better job of addressing stormwater.
I'm going to address this question from the city side a little bit.
So, again, I think for us, it starts with the mayor and council. They're providing that policy direction. We've been very fortunate in the city of Clive to have a group that is willing to trust staff to allow us to go and explore, look for the better way to do something, even if that means taking a little risk, even if that means being a bit of a pioneer in certain cases. So that part of it is all very helpful. I think the other part of it is we do spend a tremendous amount of time trying to evaluate and research other projects so that we can be knowledgeable about opportunities. We can be very knowledgeable about the financial side of development, because at the end of the day, it is a numbers game. And as long as we all are playing the same round of math, we can come up with an appropriate solution. The one question I have, be interested to hear a little bit more about is, a lot of it is having good developers. It's also about having good professionals behind the developers. So I was intrigued by the idea of having the environmental services be a partner in the group. Certainly sounds like it was a front-end side of things rather than figure out the development and then go figure out how to do stormwater or whatever it is. That's been a bit of our struggle, so trying to figure out how to get the way that we look at the development kind of flipped around and manage the conditions and then kind of work it backwards. That's kind of been our struggle at the moment.
You mean getting developers to take that spin?
Right, so it's very easy to start with the piece of paper and draw how many rectangles you can get on it and work your math that way. And then you figure out how to manage stormwater. What we're trying to do, and similar to the examples that were done, there was obviously a lot of analysis trying to figure out how to uncomplicate that component of managing stormwater on the front end side. So trying to get to a point where the developers understand that if they bring in professionals that are able to kind of sort out and figure out the details, it's going to save time, energy, and hopefully cost on both sides is my question.
Well, let me kind of add something to that, and then we'll turn it over to the larger group. And that is, what is the role of city planning whether it's your stormwater management planning, it's comprehensive planning, what are the roles of the planning on the part of the city? How can that be done in a way that starts to lead to developers coming in and understanding what the playing field looked like and understanding how to incorporate the ecology and the more refined stormwater management pieces? Is that question making sense? What's the role of the city in planning in a way that could be helpful here? Is there one?
What I have found and maybe you experienced this too, is we talk about gray and green infrastructure, the conservation type development being green, gray being conventional pipe. Where planning is very important is getting everybody on the same playing field on the municipal side, because you can come up using experts like AG, which we have at Gray Station, and come up with fantastic design. And I'm not saying this happened in Des Moines, but in other localities it has. The engineers say, oh, but wait, we don't trust that, put the gray in too. And that's where you get into the cost issues and the overbuilt environment. And if you can have a collaborative planning process that helps adopt policies that makes that green a reality and offsets that additional cost or repetitive infrastructure, that goes a long way to making it a reality, in my opinion.
Well, almost all of our communities are planned unit developments, which means we kind of throw out the zoning book. And so it really becomes collaborative. And I think it is a matter of the planner sitting down and keeping us honest that we're achieving the goals that the city's looking for. And I really agree with you that a real important role of the planning department is for the city to set their vision, set their goals, what are they trying to achieve. If they don't know that, then it's really tough for us to provide them with what they need. So I think it really becomes very important just in that getting the city organized on what they're looking for.
Tim?
Oh, I'm sorry. I do agree with Dave, that everything starts with the goals. What do you want your community to look like? And that varies community to community, and every community has 6 or 7 elected officials that we have to figure that out, and those people in the seats change over time, and so we need to have some consistency as a city of where we want to end up. But I think if we know what our community goals are, then we can sit down with the developers and figure out where do we want to end up. And in the end, I think we have 2 things. We want to follow the rules and make sure they're done. But when it's finished, we want to have a product that doesn't come back later and we say, well, we should have done it differently. And I know that's the fear of the council, is that if it isn't done right, they get the calls and staff has to deal with problems. I agree with Doug, is that if you don't do it right, at some point, you're going to live that every time it rains. And so that's, to me, that's the big challenge, is how do you mitigate that before it starts without really penalizing developers and killing developments.
And I may just add, on Woodland Cove, which is 480 acres, we get on that project for 10 years, it's probably going to be at least another 5 years till it's built out. And one of the things we did, which I've never done before, we have a developer's agreement, but we have a flexible PUD. And in that, we've got about 12 to 15 values that were important to the city. And it came from the city council and the workshop they had of trying to develop what their values were for the site. And in this agreement, what it allows us to do is make changes in the plan as long as we adhere to those core values. And it goes to kind of what you're talking about. I know I might have different councils in the next 15 years. And I've invested millions of dollars, and I can't have just all of a sudden some nibbies show up on the council and veto it. And so there's a very important role to play. Setting those values, what are the values, making sure they're in there, then as we come through in our future plans, making sure that whatever changes we make, we're still honoring those values.
I think I speak for everyone here when I say we want to see that flexible PUD, and in my mind that's almost redundant, so this is going to be an interesting thing to get to look at.
Send me your emails and I'll send you the developers.
We'll figure out a way to make something available to folks. What questions do we have from the larger group here? Yes, sir.
To Joe and John, you guys have been into conservation development for a while, and my question is, are your customers starting to get it? I know that the cities and the planners and the developers all understand the value of the conservation development versus some of the traditional ones that we've done. But are the customers finally getting, coming in and saying, you know, I appreciate what's being done to handle the environmental issues. I'm willing to take a smaller lot, maybe pay a relatively higher cost for that smaller lot because of the environmental improvements with, you know, conservation. So in relative terms, are you guys able to, are the customers getting it now and willing to take on lots that address those issues?
No.
No.
And what they do value is the open space and the trails. And I think in research from the National Association of Home Builders, the #1 amenity is trails. And so they like the open space, they like the trails, they love that. They could care less about stormwater.
We constantly battle, what you heard earlier, residents that are, and I was talking to Jennifer earlier, they call Polk County Weed Commissioner on us. It happened in Johnston, I don't know if you remember that. They call the weed commissioner on us all the time to mow down our prairies because there's weeds, or they call the cities about the snakes and the bugs and spraying mosquitoes, and we get people that will go out and buy at Home Depot gallons of Roundup and just round up their prairie areas, or they throw their dog waste in there. You name it. They like the open space, as you said, but the majority, there are a few people, there are purists out there that love it, but for the vast majority of them, they care about the open space, the trails, the amenities, what it does or why it's doing it. It's very difficult, and it's a constant communication process with them. I don't know how we're going to get it to sink in, but it's tough.
Both of our sites, all of our sites I showed you, have got a lot of woods. And the number of calls we get from residents who want the dead tree and the open space removed because they don't like looking at it. Well, it's great wildlife habitat. That's why we left them there. But it's an eyesore.
I'll have some follow-ups for you on that if we get an opportunity. Other questions from the group here?
To build on that a little bit is, particularly in Minnesota, have you found good examples of where, obviously there's a public education issue there in terms of residents over time understanding the value of these systems beyond just the trail and the open space. Have you found any good examples of cities and developing community working together to educate on those, maybe beyond just a community, maybe in a regional sense? I know that's part of the reason for this group and what we've been working on is really educating on a lot of these practices. And I'd be curious to know if you guys have seen good examples of how a city or any kind of jurisdiction and developing community have come together to better educate on why these things are important. Because I think it's going to take a long time to change those minds for them to understand that prairie is really important for infiltration. And I know from an elected official standpoint, the #1 complaint that they get, at least in this area, is stormwater drainage in my backyard or erosion in my backyard, and what's the city going to do about it? The city needs to take care of their water. And to me, I'd just be curious if there's educational programs out there, effective ones that you've maybe witnessed.
We've tried a lot of things, and I haven't really come up with anything. I mean, I think there's a general awareness in the population of this need and what's happening with global warming and everything else. So I think at that level, there is an awareness. As mentioned earlier, we also do signage so that people, when they walk on the trails, can understand why we did what we did. But I'm not sure that they're willing to pay for it. When we did Wild Meadows, one of the things we were really excited about was what we did with that 200 acres of open space and different plant life. And we went into the woods, it was a large wooded area, we thinned out the woods, we cut down the dead trees, we get more sunlight in there so we could restore the ground cover. We started scheduling neighborhood community gatherings with our ecologists so we could take them out and show them what we're doing. And I think I quit after the second one. I don't remember the first one, but the second one, I think we had 3 people show up. And I just said, this is worth it. Now, in this one community we're working on down in Rosemont, I'll have about 1,100 households in there when I'm done. And it's the first phase of more stuff to come. It's a very unique site. And one of the things we may well do is have some community gatherings and tie in. The site's being sold by the University of Minnesota, so tie in with them and their ag school and maybe use that as a method to explain to people. But as I told you, on Wild Meadows, we did a PowerPoint explaining the whole system. And step by step of why we're doing what we did, pictures, the whole thing, made everybody read it. It was impressive.
We have an education process. Every time we buy a new home, we go through the same steps at Hello Realty Company. We have special training seminars for all the real estate agents where they even get continuing education credits. And we do this on a quarterly basis. We reach out with news articles. We have a community newsletter that keeps an update on the prairie in our homeowners associations. So we're trying to make our best efforts to educate. But if you're a homeowner and you have a soggy place in your backyard and someone's talking about West Nile mosquitoes or people talking about Lyme disease with ticks, they look to that prairie and say, that's the culprit. You know, I have kids. It's going to impact me in a way for them to be connected to wildlife. So there's still a big, strong suburban mentality out there that it should be all concrete, moved away, out of my sight, and so that I can have an environment where I don't have to worry about any of that stuff. It's just interesting how people are affected by what's on the news, and they think it's going to hit home right away to them, even though the opposite is true. It's a more healthy place to live.
Questions? What else? Yes?
What's your thoughts on, like, minimum size, I'm looking at you guys as the developers, minimum size land acreage for these kind of developments? I know in a lot of our suburbs, for small developments, and the ones you were showing, Dave, were 200 and 300 acres, which is kind of a luxury, but you got to be a certain developer with some resources to be able to buy that kind of raw ground and go through this planning process on a large scale.
We've done it as small as 7 acres. We call it conservation development light.
Okay.
So it doesn't have all the features, but we primarily what we did is focus on stormwater.
So would you say that pretty much all of your developments have some, at this point, some component of stormwater and water quality?
And I'd rather say we have some component of conservation development, you know, significant open space. Yeah, that's what we believe in. And because of open space, we can then treat stormwater.
Sorry, could you just answer why? And I'm assuming the why is because, again, in Minneapolis and within these watershed boundary areas, the regulations are requiring a certain level of stormwater management.
Well, there's a regulatory side of it, but then also that's a benefit of owning my own company. I can do it because I want to. And it's something we believe in. And it's something that Newland believes in as well. That's why I'm team with it. You know, we want to go above and beyond the minimum requirements.
Our sites are 200 acres plus that we've developed conservation developments on. They're larger sites. Conservation techniques can be applied to just about anywhere you're developing. You could take a component of what you learned and make, even if it's some small impact above and beyond, you can do it. Hello Realty Company is much like your company. We do it because we want to, not because we're regulated to do so. There's a variety of techniques and there's a lot of creativity that could come out of working with the city, working with your engineers, and utilizing these native approaches. But the acceptance has to be on both sides of the table. It can't just be pushed from one.
And
One thing we haven't talked about, I brushed upon it briefly, touched upon it briefly, but I've got some good friends that have got a large community in Lakeville, south of Twin Cities. And they've created some, very large, almost lakes. And what they're doing with one of them is they're using the water to irrigate all the common areas. They've created their own private utility. They're selling the water to the HOA at half the price of what the city charges. And this is going to be, a long-term, developers will be passing the ownership of this private utility onto their grandkids. It hasn't paid back yet, but it's another way that if we get into soils, we have problems with infiltration, you can reuse that water in different ways. And I think that's something I want to just encourage you to think about.
And I'd like to talk about this quickly, have you guys talk about this quickly on a regional scale. We've been talking about the cities and the developers working together. but what can we do from a regional perspective to improve our stormwater management? And how do the cities and the developers collaborate more regionally effectively? Too hard a question?
Tim's got a great example. Elsa's Road Corridor. We made a regional system.
You mean regional detention, or are you talking about regional?
Regional stormwater management, whatever form it might need to take. I could see a big giant treatment train going for miles if we did this right.
I guess my perspective on that is what I think Aaron coined the phrase several meetings ago when he first put this together, was that every community has its own unique solutions to what it is. And in Waukee, we're on top of the hill, and so we need to be cognizant of our water has to be controlled before it gets to the next waterway. And so from us, we can work regionally, but we have to do our part in it and with our own solution that benefits the whole region.
I think, again, in Clive, we've come to the realization that the idea of putting little puddles in backyards, in individual backyards, or any series of 5 backyards, that they're also now going to equally maintain the detention basins is ridiculous. So we've gone away from that, really tried to go to a regional approach, looking at how to manage stormwater for areas of about 100 acres. There would be multiple developments and multiple property owners. The city is a partner in that investment. We may be on the front end helping facilitate the initial construction and then getting repaid as development comes online for their contributing shares. But you know, just within your own community, that regional concept, I think if you look at it, will start making better sense in terms of this idea of how are you going to manage it from a long-term perspective. But I think, as Pat was kind of alluding to, I think there is also this greater concept, particularly within whatever size watershed you want to look at. But if all of the partners within the Walnut Creek watershed can kind of determine what is the most appropriate long-term strategy for managing the developed condition, again, those efficiencies and those economies of scale are going to pop out, I think, and create a better long-term environment.
Any final questions from the audience? Yes.
The Minnesota developments, from a fiscal standpoint, did the cities help?
The first one, yes.
In the first one, yes. And AS designed a stormwater treatment train there, and Steve will tell you that when he goes out and does his presentations to people like you, he'll tell you about how the stormwater treatment train saves money for the developer, except at Wild Meadows. And the reason is because we restored 200 acres of open space, and it cost us a lot of money. But in that case, the city created an ordinance that because of what we did from a conservation standpoint and stormwater standpoint, they gave us 30 extra lots. And so they gave us economic incentive there. In the other 2 cities, no. They, you know, just part of the overall give and take that occurs in the planning and development.
Can a conservation development happen with, like, in West Des Moines, land prices are incredibly high, and Joe can attest to it. How can we make these happen with land prices that are so exceptionally high without having the city supplement it financially?
Well, part of one of the things I believe is that if everybody knows what the rules are, smart supply and demand. Everybody knows what the rules are, and it's going to cost you X amount to develop the site, and that includes stormwater management, and you can only sell a lot for Y, then the landowner can only get so much. And, you know, we've run through that, I'm sure you have too, post-recession. I mean, we're developing a site right now where the seller, the net, on a gross acreage basis, a lot of the site's not usable, but on gross acreage, we paid about $40,000 an acre, which is fairly low. Pre-recession, the homeowner had it sold for $200,000 an acre. Now, they couldn't make it work, but what we still find is a lot of buyers have their mindset of pre-recession prices. And it's just going to take time for them to realize that doesn't work these days.
Maybe you get a better solution for West Des Moines than I do.
Well, conservation developments are more expensive to develop than conventional. We thought at first that it would be a wash, but it's actually not because of the maintenance requirements that are quite substantial. And a lot of people believe that developers are not kicking in supporting that HOA, but we are. We're writing checks on a monthly basis to help sustain that development, or tearing it down and redoing it like we did in Carlisle, because invasive species came in and we had no other choice. When you look at what's happening with land prices, there's a lot of components that are adding to it. We have rising construction and labor costs. Our labor in our Des Moines metropolitan area is through the roof because we don't have it. We have one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country, and everybody's robbing a person from another area in Des Moines. And all that's happening is wage escalation, which then computes back into construction costs. Cities, as you know, are running out of methods to fund infrastructure, and a lot of the upfront systems that cities used to pay for, they don't anymore. They're borne by developers. Those are rising input costs. But in the end, what it all comes down to is land is the residual that's left over for what someone can afford to pay for a home. A home in Des Moines is roughly, the lot cost is 20% of the home price. A developer, typically in Des Moines area, you're not as lucrative as Minnesota, makes between 15 to 20% on that lot. You back that out, you back out the cost, and the land's left over. And it's just all about what you can pay for. That's why the discussion of cost is so important among us. If we can all understand these parameters, it's math. X plus Y plus Z equals the result. And if you can't solve those variables, it just will not happen. That's why the collaboration in these discussions are so important, and trust has to be a part of that equation as well. The reason why we got Gray Station done in Des Moines was because we had trust, and because everybody was open to what each side had to achieve, and we weren't trying to outdo the other side. We were trying to create a win-win scenario, and I think that's really what it takes.
As I'm saying, thinking about the question, there are a lot of things the city can do. You know, we talked about time being money. How fast can you get approval through the process? What are your, if you have outside consultants, engineers that review the plans, what do they charge? I mean, I run into situations where the city's consultant charges twice the rate my engineer would charge to do a plan. What can you do to keep those costs down? What about having smaller lots? You know, there's a lot of things you can do that aren't going to cost the city money. It can make it much more incentivize the developer to work with you. And so I think that goes back to that collaboration. There's a lot of ways you can help the developer if you want to. If it's a good development that you want to see.
I think so that we can get to our own roundtable discussions, I think we will take a quick break here, about 10 minutes. When we come back, we're going to be at these 4 tables, 1, 2, 3, 4. You're going to mix yourselves up as much as possible. If you recall, that's probably a good way to do it, to have good, healthy discussions, and we'll have a discussion guide for you. And before you depart, can we please thank our wonderful panelists with a big round of applause. We're kind of getting at, though, the really big question here in a way is, that's one of the tables, this one, and this one. And we need more people over here than we have right now. Maybe we only need 3 tables, maybe we have enough people leave. Why don't you guys collapse over here? Right. Yeah. Come on down to this table and we'll skip that one. What we're really trying to get to essentially is kind of a larger question of, if we were to start really being more serious and thinking about stormwater management and green infrastructure, as that word implies, as infrastructure, as utilities, how would we be doing things differently than we're doing them today? So we've kind of tried to carve up that question by talking about different roles of the developers, different roles of the city, and then other stakeholders and what their roles should be. So you're going to see a half-dozen questions to get the conversation going. Then we would like to prepare for report out. We'd like somebody to kind of put the bullets together related to public-private partnerships and the role of the developer. That's your recorder. And then the role of the cities to improve outcomes, and talk about that. That's kind of the things to fill out. If you have time, you can move on to the final part of the quiz here, which are what are the changes that need to be made and by whom to improve public-private partnerships and associated stormwater management outcomes. So now there's more than one kind of public-private partnership. We've been tending to think about the developer and the city. That's been one of the things we've been talking about a lot here today. But we've also mentioned in the past the homeowners associations. We've talked to somewhat about a regional role. So there's different kinds of stakeholders, different kinds of public-private partnerships. But if you have a reporter, a recorder, and a facilitator, if the facilitator will kind of focus on these 6 questions on the first page and work you through them, and your recorder will take notes, that'll be good enough. We'll be in good shape here today, okay? So, I have it as 3:15, not quite. So 3:40, we'll be calling the question, and see how far you can get on this sheet of paper here today. I'll come around to work with you. Make sure you get those people appointed to get it started. So if you need to introduce yourselves to each other first, if somebody doesn't know somebody around the table, it might be good to do a quick introduction around the table, and then proceed. Over here first, I think because I have the most people around the table, well, you time at that table, but you're closest to me. So who's reporting out over here?
You took great notes. We'll do it together.
All right. And project a little bit, if you will.
Well, let's see here.
So kind of the first part is sort of what is the developer's role and what should it be? And then similarly kind of city, and then we're looking at region, that kind of thing.
Yeah. We talked about the developer's current role, in our opinion, is basically just meeting the minimum requirements. I mean, across the board, that's generally what they do. Rarely do we get people like this Dave gentleman who, and I talked to him in the hallway on the way out, well, because he was asked, why do you do it? Well, developers are rarely at the point where he's at, where he's doing it for future generations, and he wants his developments to be sustainable and to be a good quality development for years to come.
Mm-hmm.
And to do that, you got to
brand.
It's
part of his company's brand.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, he said that too. It's part of his company's brand, and he's pretty. He cares a lot about that. But it costs extra money to do that. Otherwise, he'd be doing what most developers do, just the bare minimums. So that's currently what they do. What other questions, Pat?
What should be the role of the developer?
Yeah, we'd like to think developers could be look more long-term, instead of in the short term and just the bottom dollar when they're, sell it out as quickly as possible, look more long-term and see about how long development can be a good quality development for years to come. What should be the roles of cities? We talked about we're still in experimental stages on a lot of these things. We're still kind of kicking the tire on a lot of different techniques. Doug talked about there's a lot of things in the toolbox, more than even what we just talked about here. As far as conservation, we kind of honed in on conservation development here, but there's a lot more things we can do. What should cities do? We talked about, we look at a lot of layers. As city planners and things, we look at comp plan and planning and utilities and infrastructure. We could also be looking at the watershed as a layer and how this particular development impacts either the watershed downstream or upstream.
Mm-hmm.
That's just another layer that can be looked at during the planning process that sometimes gets,
Gets lost.
What could cities also do? Clarity of standards across the different agencies or different cities, so the standards are the same, standardizing, and perhaps that's setting the bar at different, maybe higher levels.
Higher minimal bar for everybody.
cities could do the toolbox, and then we talked about establishing goals versus specific methods. So each development talked about having goals for some of these larger developments. Now the methods of how you reach those goals might be different, which kind of goes to flexibility. These times developers want cities to be more flexible. We hear that a lot. What other stakeholders should their roles be? We talked about some of the maintenance implications. We talked about that a little bit today of some of these things, different techniques. There's maintenance implications to all of them. And who's going to take care of them? Is it an HOA, or maybe if we get into more regional, there's a regional approach, which we talked about, like a nature conservancy would be potentially a, more of a managing role in some of these areas. We also think other stakeholders that need to be involved are policymakers. We all in this room probably have a better handle on the technical components, but a lot of our policymakers don't really understand the technical.
Yeah, so there's a policy technical disconnect.
Yeah.
And so the city's got to figure out how to fill that void in the region. Greg, do you have anything else to add from your notes?
I think you covered really well.
Okay,
So,
good. Very good. What do you guys have to add to this conversation related to the roles of developers, cities, and other stakeholders?
I kind of circled the things that Dave didn't touch on that I think we talked about, otherwise he hit a lot of the same things. Educating the citizens, what should be the role of the city educating the citizens? And we figured that there's a lot of people like me that are kind of stuck in their, their old ways, and, people are just stuck, like, I'm not going to get a rain barrel when I can turn on my faucet.
Right.
That sort of thing. So why not start in the schools with, kids that can kind of understand, get into the science classes or something where kids can actually understand, picking up pollutants, what's going on, why a standard detention pond really doesn't clean pollutants, it just kind of, washes them downstream. We got to filter those things and kind of get them in the mindset of, yeah, maybe this stuff is important, and not to scare them into it, but like say, hey, look at what the rains are getting heavier. This wasn't like this when I was a kid. And we've got to start doing things now to fix those things. So maybe have that education piece with the younger kids. And then I guess other stakeholders would be the end users, the homeowners. They're the ones that are going to have to live around this stuff. So they're the ones that need to be involved, but getting them engaged is very difficult. And one thing that we did say that is, listening to what the developers were talking about out there, all I can, as a city engineer in West Des Moines, looking at that, all I can see is more maintenance responsibilities for the city. And how are we going to fund it?
Yeah.
And how are we going to get the expertise to help do that? I mean, there's people out there that do that, but we're going to have to hire different people or educate our current people, because our current people build, fill potholes and fix storm sewers. They don't go out and look at species of plants and determine. I mean, you ask those guys to go out there, they'll look at you like, I'm not doing that.
Get the Roundup bottle.
Right, exactly.
And that's happened. More times than we care to know
And
about.
they're union guys, so they'll just say, that's not in my job description, I'm not doing that.
Yeah. It's a big,
Right.
it's a big piece of it. It's a big piece of it, definitely. And what do you guys have to add here?
I'll just have a couple different spins on things. Maybe we talked about it differently. One was, what should the role be of developers? Ideally, coming in a little bit more flexible without a defined plan of exactly what they want to do. And by doing that, you open yourselves up to at least having more of the conversation of what is the profit motive for specific development. And once you know that profit motive, you can talk about how can we fit in this profit motive alternate methods of managing stormwater. If you don't even talk about how it could work on a specific site, if you don't have that conversation, it's not going to get talked about. Talking about the roles of cities, our conversation really went to, right now, if you follow the standards that are out there with how development should happen, you know what the timelines are going to be, things are going to make it to council, they're going to be passed. If you get off that and try and do something different, you're opening the door to multiple engineers, multiple levels of oversight, time, and time is money. So really developing an alternate path that meets additional stormwater standards, whether it's our stormwater management or whatever it is, and developing that route. So if that route is followed, it can go through the same process where you know the timeline, it's not getting all these extra eyes, it's not going to confuse people, but really developing alternate paths.
So being proactive about what a developer needs to go through is a role that the city can play.
Yep.
Being proactive in putting that together, okay?
And then we really, all the rest of our conversation stuck around that idea, and that right now, there's a lot of good projects going on around the metro, but a lot of times there was some motivating factor of why or how that additional requirements were imposed upon the developer because of some extenuating circumstance. So the question is, how do you make that extenuating circumstance be a part of every conversation of every development?
In other words, how do we make this all routine
Yeah.
and look at the stormwater management first?
And not make it something that costs more money and takes 5 times more time, make it part of the standard process.
And did you guys touch on the regionalization of all this work at all?
Well, it definitely came up. We talked about ideas of, city ownership versus private ownership, city ownership, and then for regional development, so when different developers come in, they can pay into this regional structure that's already on the ground, different funding mechanisms that could be
Like
utilized.
setting a connection fee district for stormwater, build a regional detention basin downstream,
I think
municipally
that
owned.
got,
And then waive the on-site storage requirements for upstream development in greenfield sites, but they have to buy in to the downstream.
I think we tried that and it failed.
Oh, it failed.
But you
Yeah.
require it can be done voluntarily. There's a difference.
Well, not fee in lieu of, connection fee.
It failed in court.
Yes.
Well, wasn't that fee in lieu of for other things?
Well, it was a connection fee district, just like a sanitary sewer connection fee district.
For a big giant culvert.
For culverts.
Storms.
But you could try to do that for other things too, but it's not going to happen because it's already been.
I think some of that too, my understanding is that the state legislature hasn't authorized cities for fees like that for stormwater where they have for like water and sewer.
Specifically.
Yeah, it needs
For
legislation.
connection.
For connection.
And there are no impact abilities in the state.
Right.
But
So
we
there-
can circumvent with water and sewer because that's defined.
So there's some state code that needs to be worked on.
That's one resolution to that. Doug's saying too, like if it's done on a voluntary, like
You can
agreement.
still do
between
exactly
two
what you said,
developers.
and it's the developer's choice. I can either build a pond on my property, fine, or because it's more efficient, I'll buy my credit out of the regional basin. Their choice.
It's so fascinating, you know, really pointing out some different things that need to happen. So maybe this next time, when we're starting to think about who pays and some of those policy pieces, maybe we can get some of this summarized. If you have any notes that you took that you'd like to share with me, and Aaron and Jennifer and Greg, pass them on. And we did not get notes from last time summarized because it was a 3-week window, and I was gone for a full week of that 3-week window. But we'll have summaries developed by our next time together, which is September 12th.
I believe.
Okay. Is there anything else to be said about September 12th at this point, other than it's going to be phantasmagorical?
Bring a friend.
Yeah.
The only other thing is, this got handed out for October 2nd for all of you to come to the Green Infrastructure Workshop, but also we'll make sure it gets out electronically, but there's a breakfast session for the policymakers, the elected officials, people that maybe can't do the whole day or aren't interested in everything. from 7:30 to 9, and it's, $20 or $25 to come to that. So we need to get the word out to others in your communities to get them.
And
Yeah, we really wanted
that
to
has been
stress
sent
that.
out to Candy Rhino with the city of Des Moines to send out through the MAC.
Okay, perfect.
That'd be great. Yeah, if you
But
guys
if you
can
were to invite your
reinforce
own-
that, though, by talking, if you're not a city manager, talk to your city manager or whoever you can talk to that can get to your council. It would really be great, because we internally have a Clive city council member at our office, and her question was, is there some portion of this that's intended for decision makers, for policy makers? And the answer was, yes, the first 90 minutes. So please, share that. And that would be helpful. Anything else for the good of the order? Great conversations. I'd love to see some notes if anybody's got any that they can share. And